So I want to move on to the next story because we are way over on these. These are gonna be some long ass segments, but we're targeting some deep stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Good
okay,
conversation.
yeah, it's great. It's been great so far. All right, I want to get into this. As we're talking about race, from National Review, BLM chapter sue organization head over alleged $10 million theft. National Review is a right leaning source. There are some left leaning sources that I'm going to try to throw in here. But here's the gist of it. A lawsuit filed by a coalition of 26 Black Lives Matter chapters has accused the organization's foundation head of unjust enrichment, quote unquote, specifically the theft of $10 million in charitable contributions for personal expenditures. Black Lives Matter grassroots claims that Shalomaya Bowers, I believe is how you pronounce that, the leader of the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation, defrauded the local activist groups by siphoning funds away from them. The assets that we built, the financial resources, the social media platforms, and the name Black Lives Matter have been taken from us and are under the control of consultants. Dr. Melina Abdullah, the director of BLM Grassroots and a co-founder of the BLM Los Angeles chapter, said at a recent press conference. Bowers denied that he engaged in financial misconduct, suggesting that the BLM Grassroots Network is complicit in systemic racism and launching litigation against him. His consulting firm was allegedly paid $2 million by the foundation in fiscal year 2020, according to a tax filing. So what about the other $8 million? Lawyer Walter Mosley, representing the plaintiffs in the case, told the Los Angeles Times that Bowers funneled money from the organization to his business and charging astronomical fees in the multi-millions. The lawsuit demands that they return the people's funds and stop impersonating Black Lives Matter, Mosley said in a statement. Bauer said that the complainants who named him and the headquarters in the suit have fallen, quote, victim to the carceral logic and social violence that fuels the legal system, end quote. Quote, they would rather take the same steps of our white oppressors and utilize the criminal legal system, which is propped up by white supremacy, the same system they say they want to dismantle, to solve movement disputes, end quote. The Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation's board of directors, on which Bauer serves, said in a joint statement. Last paragraph I'm going to read. The suit filed in Los Angeles Superior Court was asked for damages and restitution as well as temporary restraining order to bar the umbrella organization from accessing BLM accounts and website. Whew. All right. So there's a lot of angles to look at this. My take is, I've been listening to a lot of more conservative commentators as well as, I've read some stuff that come from left leaning sources, but I haven't like watched videos on YouTube of leftist commentators commenting on this. They seem to be not willing to touch it. I have for a long time been critical of Black Lives Matter and some of the shady things that they've been doing, and I've been called all kinds of Uncle Toms and Uncle Ruckuses and Larry Elders and Candace Owens because of it. But I was being objective the whole time. It's not a plaything to have an organization that takes up the idea as its mantra that Black Lives Matter. Clearly, Black lives do matter. Black lives matter to me, but Black lives matter. Period. They don't matter only if you're woke. They don't matter only if you don't vote a certain way. They don't matter only if you agree with a certain ideology. They matter. Period. So when I saw Black Lives Matter turning a blind eye to right-leaning Black people who are being discriminated against some of them even, but particularly against woke white liberals, and turning a blind eye when a woke white liberal calls a Black person an Uncle Tom or any other racial slur, turning a blind eye when a Black former police officer is shot in cold blood in the middle of Missouri because those people wanted to steal TVs from a pawn shop.
What's his name?
Uh,
Dorn.
David Dorn.
David Dorn.
They turn a blind eye to a Black Trump supporter, Rasta Trump supporter by the name of Burnell Trammell, who's killed in cold blood. They don't say shit about him. They turn a blind eye to uh, a 9-year-old child by the name of Sakaria Turner, who was killed because a Black dude shot indiscriminately into a car as they were trying to set up an autonomous zone in Atlanta in the wake of the Rayshard Brooks shooting, etc. Like when they don't have nothing to say about that, but their contention is Black Lives Matter. When a Black person gets killed in the Chaz/Chop in Seattle during the Summer of Love, actually 2 Black kids, but one of them was 19 years old, and they turn a blind eye to the point where the Black father has to go on Fox News in order to even let it be heard because woke people don't have time and they're incurious about that because it contradicts their narrative. Like I started losing respect real fast. Like y'all not even addressing the problems on your side, and you're turning a blind eye to the 7% of the mostly peaceful protests that weren't peaceful at all, and that devolved into riots and looting, because 93% of them were mostly peaceful, right? Like what? Like we need to talk about that 7%, because that 7% accounts for no less than $2 billion worth of property damage and no less than 25 deaths. And some of those deaths were black people. They had the very black lives that you claim matter, right? You need to talk about that. But if it's inconvenient for your movement and that's the only reason why you ain't talking about it, then you're corrupt. Then on top of that, Patrisse Cullors is over here buying mansions and shit, and it's not clear where she's getting this money, but she leads a foundation that made $90 million in the summer. That's interesting. And she steps down in the heat of all the accusations levied against her, and then the person that replaces her is now being sued by 26 black BLM chapters. I don't see that on CNN. I don't see that on MSNBC. It's only on the right-leaning sources. Why is that? How come that woke liberal types don't want to talk about this? Now, to be fair, there are new stories from left to center that do touch on this, but they don't really. Every time I read them, it seems like they're hiding something. Like they don't want to get into the nitty-gritty. Like there's corruption here, and we need to be able to talk about corruption in the context of any movement for black people, and we need to be able to talk about it honestly. It doesn't mean that the mission is inherently corrupt, and I think that people right of center go too far when they say that. But like, there's fair criticism to be had here, and if you're unwilling to criticize it because you're too afraid of sounding like a Republican, then to me that makes you a coward. You need to be able, as a black person, to stand up for yourself and your people and criticize the organization that is claiming your name and is standing on the bodies of dead black men and acting like they care about them when they kind of don't, and they have their own political agendas, some of them, right? I think the vast majority of people who participate in Black Lives Matter protests, particularly the peaceful ones, mean well, particularly the black people. They have a vested interest. They care about black people every bit as much as I do, if not more. I take them at their word. I'm not trying to indict all of them. I'm trying to say that this doesn't make our cause look good, and we need to be able to criticize it. Otherwise, all of us look bad. So that's my take on Black Lives Matter and this issue. But I want to hear your take. Where do you stand?
First of all, I just have to give you a slow clap there real quick. Um, I mean, you said it all. I don't really have much to say about Black Lives Matter, the organization. They should be ashamed of themselves for taking people's money, not my money, because I knew better. Uh, and just spending it frivolously and thinking that no one or they couldn't be held accountable for the way they were spending those tens of millions of dollars. um, it's interesting because you brought up Patrisse Cullors, and I remember there was an article about her. I can't remember where the article was from, but she basically stated that financial disclosures and charity transparency, she views them as triggering and unsafe for Black people. And I just think it's very interesting that she thinks that Black people are exempt from the same rules and regulations that have been in place for everybody. I mean, people talk about wanting equality, under the law. This is what equality under the law looks like, right? This is what it sounds like. You have to, you know, um, show how you've been spending the money that people have been freely giving you out of the goodness of their hearts, or for some, for consumerism purposes. But I'm not really surprised at this point. I'm tired of hearing about Black Lives Matter, because every time at this point, every time we hear about them, it's something bad, it's something negative. It's not surprising. I'm not shocked in any way, shape, or form. um and it is funny, for lack of a better word, it is funny that they say that they are in support of Black lives and Black lives mattering, but you just ran through a list of things, a litany of things, where they've pretty much shown that they don't think that all Black lives matter. And I'm not even talking about like Black conservative voices, because we know like where they stand, when it comes to people like Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas and Candace Owens and I guess Brandon Tatum, to name a couple of people. We
Larry
know where
Elder,
they stand. Larry Elder, Chad Jackson, the creator of
Ben
Uncle Tom,
Carson, and then
Ben
what's that? What's the
Carson,
running back? The running back from Georgia, Walker, Herschel Walker is
Herschel
the
Walker.
Baltimore Ravens.
We know where they stand when it comes to people that are on the right of center. um, and it's unfortunate, because you can't say that you think that all Black Lives Matter, but then want to silence and choose not to amplify, voices on the other side of the aisle as well. Like I think that's ridiculous because I like even if I don't, I personally will never, such a strong word, but at this point in my life, I don't think I will support a lot of the things that you know uh black woke it but you said the woke the black of the whatever black people on that side, like
Mhm.
I don't side with any of that. I don't, but I would never say, oh, they should be allowed to speak or that their lives don't matter, because they most certainly do.
Mhm.
Which is why I've never really cared for the phrase Black Lives Matter, because I mean, sorry to say it, all lives matter. Hello. um um but yeah, I don't know. I'm tired of giving mind space to them. Like I don't want to keep talking about them. I mean, I do think they should be held accountable for whatever it is that they're doing, whether it's good, whether it's bad.
Do
If
you, do
they're
you think the entire movement should be indicted because of a few bad apples in the movement?
no, I mean, because I mean, I still, again, like I said this before earlier, you know, oh my God, I can't think that I people start with good intentions, right? And I do believe that somebody in their camp thought that um, a lot of Black lives were being lost due to police brutality, and they wanted something done about it. So they created this organization. Under first of all, the name itself is nefarious, because I'm like, that you're only, because they always say this thing when people bring up like black on black violence or gang violence or whatever, they always say, well, we're not focused on that, we're focused on police brutality, right? And I'm just like, well, you shouldn't have named your organization Black Lives Matter if you're only focusing on the lives taken by white cops.
Mhm.
It,
I
it
think I've had similar criticism too. Sorry, go ahead. I don't want to cut you off.
I mean, no, I mean, I don't really have that much more to say, but it is weird to, I love saying the word weird because I want to say something else, but whatever. But it's weird to it's it it's misleading, it's deceptive, I think, because there are let me admit this right here right now, because I've never admitted it before. And I could get away with it because I am
Black
not
News
like
Podcast exclusive.
I can admit this because I'm not like a big content creator. I just do it, because I enjoy it. But um I was one of the people that posted a black square on the day that
I'm telling everybody.
I don't care, that they said to do that. And only it was and it was, look, it was, I can fully admit here, it was based on a temporary feeling. Like that, what happened that year with Mr. Floyd, you know, I was finding myself asking a lot of questions, like, was this racist? Was it evil? Or was it just plain evil, right?
Mhm.
So it and see, I think the visceral reaction after what had happened to him, I think hit me more than what actually happened to him, because it was really scary seeing people react the way they did with the 2 billion in damages that was done. I was embarrassed. I was disappointed. I was scared. Like I was fearing for my life. They kept saying flee the cities. I lived in the city. And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, like what are we going to do if something pops off here?" Like, so all of that, yeah, it made me post that square. And then I did delete it after a couple of days because I'm just like, wait, like
Mm,
I really like yes, Black Lives Matter, but I mean, you've seen the commercial where they're like, all lives don't matter until Black lives do.
mhm,
You've seen that commercial.
mhm.
I hate that commercial so much. So much because you're basically saying that non-black people shouldn't care or we shouldn't think about them until we think about black lives. And I'm just like, I, I
You
mean,
think
that's
that?
my,
You think that's what they mean?
I mean, if you wanted to, if you wanted to be literal,
Well,
yeah.
let's steel man it. What is the best? What is the was presented in the best light? What would be the
I mean, so
most
what is that
generous
analogy?
interpretation?
The analogy they like to use is like, well, if you're a fire department or a fireman and you see a burning house or something like that, um, you're not going to go and spray water on the houses that are not burning. You're going to try to spray water on the house that's on fire. And right now, allegedly, Black lives are on fire. So we need to put the fire out.
They get the
But
priority. It's like triage.
they get the priority, the triage, exactly. But in my head, and maybe, I mean, I'm actually very proud of thinking this way or assessing situations this way. In my head, like, this is what the media wants you to think that, you know, the Black lives are on fire, right? There's so many other things going on, not only just in America, but in the world that are just as dire as what they purport to be happening in America when it comes to police brutality and Black lives. So, yes, it's an issue, but it's not the issue that there's so many other issues. And that's what, look, if there are people that want to solely focus on that, and I do believe in that. Like, we should divide and conquer. There are people that should focus on police brutality. There are people that should focus on gang violence. There are people that should focus on uh the Uyghurs in China. Whatever you want to focus, the people that want to focus on transgender issues, divide and conquer. But don't make the issue that you are so passionate about and need people to desperately focus on the sole issue. Like, don't, you know because I do see it as a form of gaslighting. Don't make us think that this is such a huge issue in America when it's not. Does that
I understand what you're trying to say. I just don't know that the facts align with what you're trying to say. I do. It's an interesting kind of philosophical question. How much of a priority should these interrelated issues facing the Black community get kind of in the context of America writ large?
uh-huh,
Because naturally certain issues are going to matter more to certain people, particularly the people
it
who
affects
are
the most?
implicated or
Yeah,
being affected the most, right? And
yeah,
so to a Black person, Black issues might be the most important, and understandably so, because they color their lives and shape their life prospects in ways that are important to them. But
but police
if the
brutality
majority of
Black issue.
America is white and the majority of America doesn't live under the conditions of Black people, then it's going to be really difficult to get the majority of America to care about Black issues if they're in the minority, right? And
Right.
so if you apply this kind of thing that you're saying in the context of contemporarily Black Lives Matter, if you were to apply that back during the Jim Crow South, during the Civil Rights Movement,
Hmm.
you could actually make an analogous argument, which is like, why are you making this issue of segregation in the South a national issue when it doesn't affect everybody? It only affects those Black people in the South that live under those, what Dr. King called shameful conditions.
Hmm.
And part of what I think the strategy was is he wanted to raise awareness to the general public of the kinds of horrible conditions, horrifying conditions that Black people were living under in the racist Jim Crow South, that a lot of white people were genuinely completely unaware of because it wasn't a part of their daily lived experience. And when they
Right.
started seeing it on the news, when they started seeing old Black ladies being attacked by dogs and innocent Black people who weren't hurting anybody being hit with high powered fire hoses that can take skin off of you, and getting beaten within an inch of their life by racist white police officers. And they were shocked by that. And they felt the visceral shock of seeing that on TV, like a lot of felt when they saw George Floyd. Right. That strategy is an effective way of raising consciousness and awareness,
I'm glad you called it
even
a
by
strategy.
people who aren't directly affected by it, because they still care that it's happening, even if it doesn't affect them. And you can get support from people politically to address an issue, because it's the squeaky wheel that gets the oil. And so, like, what I think that the
So can I
Black Lives
ask
Matter
you?
people are doing are trying to do that. Although I think that a lot of facets of their strategy and approach aren't as Dr. King's was, with the strict nonviolent policy that he took. Um, and I think that there's fair criticism there. I think the main thrust of what they're trying to do in terms of raising awareness and bringing awareness to the issue so it can get dealt with politically is valid. What do you think about that? And then ask me the question you want to
Do,
ask.
do you, is police brutality still an issue today?
Police brutality, I think, is an issue today. I think it's probably less of an issue today on the whole than it used to be in terms of Black people.
What changed? Because
Well, the
because
civil rights movement helped
because
a
I
lot. There's been
well
lots of police reform since
well
the
no I'm not, well
60s.
I'm not talking about it from like looking at the past perspective. I'm talking about it from a like, why all of a sudden was it pushed to the forefront when it was? Like I get
As far
that.
as George Floyd.
Yeah, well, I get that. I understand that that happened and there, but I mean, if you remember correctly, there were a bunch of media stories for a good span of years where they specifically highlighted situations where the victim was black and the I guess the perpetrator was white. Um, Obviously, I mean, we're not really here. I mean, I'm assuming if it's an issue that is chronic in our society, I'm assuming that it's still happening. They're not showing any of that right now. But they're also not. They also didn't show there. What was the there was a very similar situation when it came to the white person being the victim, and well, I don't know if it was a white cop or a black cop or not, but I can't remember his name. Timmy Tiny. I don't remember. Sorry for not having that ready, y'all. But I just to me I think it was a very strategic. You mentioned the word strategy. It was very strategic. This is what I feel. It was very strategic for them to place those events in our faces continuously for the period of time that they did. The timing was very convenient. It being that it was, before an election. I wouldn't be surprised if all of a sudden we started seeing those visuals and images again when 2024 rolls around. What I'm saying is, I'm not negating that police brutality is an important issue.
Mhm,
I don't think that cops should be abusing their power in that manner, right?
mhm.
Um, but I also don't want people to kid themselves in thinking that it only happens to black people or black men. I also don't want people to kid. Again, I don't think that police should abuse their power. But if you're not acting and cooperating in a certain manner that uh unfortunately does lead to your harm or your death, I mean, and if you are caught committing a crime that you shouldn't have been doing in the first place, and it again leads to your harm or your death, I mean, to me,
Well, but
you're
there's
just
nuance.
trying to
There's nuance there, though. I do think that part of what I think you're trying to say, which I
definitely.
actually,
I agree that there's nuance, but go
yeah,
ahead.
well, part of what you're saying that I actually agree with wholeheartedly is there's an accountability piece of the people who are doing things that police officers are actually called to the scene to address, and if they're actually do engaged in illegal activity, we don't want the political and emotional motivations that we have to make us turn a blind eye to the extent to which the person was actually potentially guilty
Mhm.
of the thing that they're being charged with, or the thing that the police were trying to address. We can't pretend as if there's never a circumstance under which police are legitimate. or the police decision to engage in force
Mhm.
is legitimate. Pretending as if that can never be the case, just in case it's a white cop doing this against a black person, is naive and just
Yeah.
wrong. It's just plain wrong. Um, so that's part of my bone that I had to pick with Jacob Blake, because Jacob Blake clearly did things that actually made the shooting justifiable, but it was framed in a way that made him seem like an innocent victim of police brutality, when that's not the best way to frame it, get consistent with what actually happened. He was given several chances to comply. He was tased twice. He was in the act of kidnapping kids that he wasn't supposed to be taking with him and stealing a car that didn't belong to him. Right? Like, all of those factors got thrown by the wayside because it was inconvenient for a particular kind of framing and narrative. That's unjustified. Now, George Floyd is a lot more, I think, a legitimate example of something that was that police brutality, in my opinion. However, even with that, it's complicated because he was given several chances to comply, just get into the back of the car, and he refused to do it. I don't think that he should have been killed for it, but it wasn't clear that he was actually murdered on purpose, which was how it was
Yeah,
framed
it looked like
originally.
an accident, to be quite
Yeah.
honest. I don't even
So
think the
there's
guy
maybe
knew
there's
that.
yeah, so there maybe there's a negligence issue there. But the particular move to put the knee on the neck, it's not even clear that that is an actual cause of death. I think it probably exacerbated things that were going on in his body.
Yeah.
There was the fentanyl in his system. People don't want to talk about that because to them, fundamentally, what they hear is excuse, excuse, excuse.
Mhm.
You love whiteness, you Uncle Tom. Like, that's the kind of the attitude that they have. It's like, but you're not trying to take into account all the relevant details.
Right.
However, I think that there is a strong case for negligence there, in terms of them
Yeah.
not addressing his becoming unconscious as quickly
Yeah.
as possible,
Yeah.
or whatever, or them leaning on him way too long and constricting his oxygen. Um, um, it's not clear how to evaluate morally their lack of taking into account that he might have been overdosing. Even though it was mentioned that he was showing signs of being on drugs, like, that was, I remember just watching the footage and hearing one of the police officers say that.
Mhm.
Um, but there was a very strong emotionally vested interest in indicting these police officers, and it's not clear that they did something all that bad, but it was framed as if they were just these evil, white, nefarious cops. And so, I don't
Exactly.
know, man. The George Floyd thing is actually a mixed bag. It's not clear to what extent the cops were derelict in their duties, in my opinion. Um, but to whatever extent that they are, they should have been held responsible for it. I think police officers should be held responsible if they're derelict in their duties, or if they unintentionally harm someone, whether they're black or not. Um, it's an interesting question whether or not those cops would have been indicted if everything exactly happened the exact same, but instead of a black man, it was a white man. I'm
That
genuinely
was a
curious.
that it was a there is a similar.
Yeah,
That's
I
the one
know,
I
but
was
I'm,
trying
but I'm,
to remember his name.
yeah, but and then what are the
It's
reasons
so
why? Is it
interesting. You
because
can
it wouldn't
remember
have been as
George Floyd's name, but
publicized?
this other guy.
Yeah, I can't remember his name, but that's kind of the point, right? Like,
Yeah.
but why would that be? Is it because it wasn't as publicized? Because there's
Yeah.
not as much
E
political pressure,
exactly.
right? So
It's
these are unanswered questions I don't have the answers to. But, like, yeah, so I hear where you're coming from. Now, on the other side, I want to give you pushback, though. So the nuance I want to delve into is, I don't think that police officers just can just shoot black people or anybody willy-nilly, right? Like, there's got to
mhm.
be some restraint, and police officers need to be able to demonstrate that their use of force is justified.
I agree.
And if they can't do that, then they should be held responsible, because we
This
don't
is not
want,
really pushback.
well, to me, it is, because part of what colors their decision is whether or not they view a person as a threat. And so, if there's any unconscious bias in terms of them viewing a black person who, and police officers review these statistics, who are statistically more likely to engage in violence, particularly against the police, then does that, if you know that as a police officer and you see a black person who is bigger than you, who you think could beat your ass, and who is not complying, are you more liable to shoot them? That's a fair, legitimate question, and that nuance is
Is
actually what
anyone
makes this
more
difficult.
liable to shoot them?
If they're
Is
well,
it anyone?
it depends on the person. It depends on the person. It depends on their unconscious bias.
I think in that situation,
It
if
depends on how they're interpreting the person's
because
behavior, how much stock they put into their identifying them as a black person who's like you know what I'm
I
saying?
mean,
Like,
okay,
that
but you
those
said two
nuances
things.
are
You said big and black. So which one is it? Are they pulling
no,
the trigger because they're bigger than them or they're blacker than them?
no. What I'm saying is that that's going to be a part of their assessment. All of those things are going to be taken into account,
Why would race
right?
be
So
taken into
if you have a suspect or a perp, right, to use the terminology that they
account? Uh-huh.
often use, who you would describe, you can readily identify visibly as black male, and you as a police officer know the statistics around black males' tendency to engage in
Okay.
violence, the criminal statistics, right? And also the particular black male you happen to see is bigger than you, and if you allow them to, could probably fuck you up
Right.
and take your life. And you don't want that to happen because you got mouths to feed, you got a family, or you just don't want to die that day.
Yeah.
And they're engaging in a manner that is hostile to you. They're not complying at all, right? Are you more likely to be trigger happy against that person? That's a subtle nuance. And it's not good. That question is not going to be the same for every single police officer. And so that colors this discourse because it's ambiguous.
Okay. Okay. So I see where you're coming from, because I think, especially as an officer, you should have a little more, you should assess the situation a little more than someone like myself, like a layperson. Because if it were me in that situation, I'm pulling that trigger because I can't fight you. Sorry. Um, but I think officers should take that extra step. I think that should be a part of their, um, I guess, their person as as an officer, to take that extra step in assessing the situation to see if it
But
begs for them to pull the trigger.
but part of what makes it unresolved is that judgment, first of all, a lot of times is a quick decision. It's
Yeah.
not something you get to sit and process.
Yeah.
Secondly, it's colored by a whole bunch of subconscious things that are going on below the surface in terms of what is leading you to identify this person as a threat. What aspects of them are you identifying
Well,
as a
the
threat?
preconceived notions that you were mentioning.
Yeah. So but that's what I'm saying is because that's below the surface. It's ambiguous
But is that, I
in
don't,
any
I
instance.
mean,
And also, wait, but also the last thing is like there's a lot at stake because you
yeah.
could die if you're in that situation as a police officer if you judge
Yeah.
wrong. So if you err on the side of caution, you're like, I don't want to go to jail for shooting an unarmed black person, but then that black person takes your life, then you're
Mhm.
just dead. Like there's you're dead. And all of the other consequences that follow from that. Right. Like it's not an easy situation. And
Yeah.
I don't think
Yeah.
there's a one size fits all answer to here. And
Yeah.
that nuance makes this almost irresolvable because I don't know of any societal wide or structural or systemic action you could take to resolve the core of the issue, which is what I just attempted to describe. I like putting police body cams doesn't really solve the fallibility of that judgment, right? Like all it does is makes us witnesses to it, but we're not in your mind, we're not in your head. And so there's still ambiguity there. We can see what happened, kind of, but then it's going to be open to interpretation in terms of what your intentions were, what your unconscious biases were or weren't, um, etc. And so, like, we had video footage of George Floyd, and there was still a whole bunch of unanswered questions. We had video footage of Jacob Blake. A lot of people didn't watch it clearly because they didn't know what the fuck happened. But like, we had video footage of that. We had video footage of Rayshard Brooks, and there's a lot of unanswered questions even with that. So like, just the presence of a body cam doesn't necessarily resolve the issue either, because of the core of the issue that I just tried to that judgment of whether or not it is justified to use force in any particular instance, given the situation and given
It's gonna be
given the
subjective.
limited knowledge. I mean, even take what happened with Ma'Khia Bryant. Like on one reading, that cop was justified in shooting that 16-year-old girl who I don't even know that he knew her age because she had a knife cocked back like she was about to stab a person. And he was trying to get a control of the situation, and it was really quick and it was really fast. And so what? And it was two black people. It was a black girl with a knife against another black girl with I think a dog in her hand or something. So what is that cop supposed to do? That's an impossible situation, right? But a lot of people got upset with that because it's like, yep, another cop killed us, murdered a 16-year-old precious black child. It's like, but
But it's
you ain't
funny
even taking
because
into account all the
if
context.
Micaiah had ended up stabbing the girl, he probably would have had to shoot her anyway. So you would have had two injured black girls.
And that's what I'm saying. It was an impossible situation, and like people don't want to be nuanced about this. They want these things to
They
conform to
don't.
certain preconceived notions, and like that's not a mature way to discuss these issues, man. And like nobody wants a
I mean, I think
16-year
you
old
should have
black
tried
girl
it.
to be shot by cops. Like I don't want Rayshard Brooks to get shot. I don't want George Floyd,
Of
the next
course.
George Floyd, to get shot.
Of course.
I don't want no Jacob Blakes being paralyzed. I don't want none of that shit. But like, what do? What do? You can have a police force that's not armed.
I
You're gonna
mean,
cripple their
you
ability
look,
to to
look,
to,
look, look,
to,
look.
to
You
address
make
anything.
your bed and you lay in it. Like
I mean, but like that's what I'm saying. Like
the
these
choices that
solutions
people
are
have made.
these problems don't have
I
easy
don't know if I
solutions.
can feel that sorry for them. Sorry. I
But
don't
I
know.
do feel sorry for the loss of life. I don't like the loss of
Like,
life.
of
I think
course, but it's like
that makes sense.
if you are the contributor to you losing your life, I mean,
Yeah, but okay, but part of the controversy is there anything the police officers could have done in any of these situations that could have resulted in these black people still being alive? And
people say
that's
all
a
the
fair
time,
question.
like, oh, they could have shot him in the limb or in the arm or, somewhere that wouldn't
Or
lead
maybe
to
not
death
shot him at all.
immediately.
Maybe not
What,
shot him at all.
what
Maybe
would be the
wrestled him to the
alternative? A
ground or
taser? Because we've
something.
seen that tasers don't really work like that.
Maybe wrestle him to the ground. So I had somebody argue that the police officers
But if they're
with
stronger than
Rayshard
you,
Brooks. So I had somebody argue that the police officers involved with Rayshard Brooks were incompetent because they didn't have the ability to wrestle him to the ground and keep him.
remind me which one was the Rayshard Brooks
Sorry,
one?
not Rayshard Brooks. Sorry, Jacob Blake. Jacob Blake is what I meant
Okay.
to say. Rayshard Brooks as well, but he was talking
Who
about
was the one
Jacob
at
Blake.
the drive-through at Wendy's or
Yeah,
something?
yeah.
Okay.
And so he out wrestled two cops drunk. And so, what does that imply about the inadequacies of those police officers? Is really the point. And I think there's some fair questions to be had
Yeah,
there
yeah,
in
yeah.
terms of criticizing that. But the point is that you have police officers who are not adequate for the job. If they had the ability to subdue the perp in question in a way that didn't require shooting them, then those people wouldn't get shot. But because our police officers are inadequate physically or whatever, then what that does is that maximizes the likelihood that they'll shoot someone when they don't have to. And there's some validity to that criticism, but like you can't guarantee even the strongest, most apt police officers are going to be available on the scene when they need to be,
Yeah.
right? Because a lot of that shit is unpredictable. Nobody even knew that Rayshard Brooks was even going to be a physical threat at that time. And I watched the entire footage. It was like 45 minutes. He was very respectful. He was basically trying to negotiate with the police officers because I think he was aware that he had just got out of jail, and if he got arrested for DUI, that was going to fuck up everything. And so the stakes were high. And I think that's what motivated him to do what he did. Not because he's a criminal, not because he's black, but because the stakes were really, really high, that he had just got out of jail and he was on probation. And so he was going to go to jail for a very long time with that DUI.
Mhm.
So he was trying to negotiate and trying to do the responsible thing, even though he had already done an irresponsible thing by driving drunk through the wind. He was trying to sober up. I think he was attempting, my interpretation is he was attempting to go to that drive-through, get some food in the system, sober up so that he can drive home safely. He fell asleep in the drive-through. They called the police officer on him. Then when he woke up in that situation, it's like, oh shit, how do I get out of this? Because the
Yeah.
stakes are high. Because I got a daughter I got to worry about, and I can't be in jail and not take care of my daughter. Like a lot of people don't know all of that stuff because they didn't do any research. Because all they saw was a black man got shot by cops, and they think the cops are evil, right? The cops, on the other hand, it's not really, it's not. I don't think it's fair to expect them to take all of that nuance into account because there's just some guy in the drive-through who's drunk, and it's against the law to drive while you're drunk, and
Mhm.
so they got to enforce the law. So like we're gonna arrest you, and then at that point, when you start resisting arrest, then now I'm authorized to use deadly force because you're resisting arrest. Stop. Then they tried to tase him. That didn't work. Then what some people say is what they should have did is just pursued him. They could have found him later. They didn't have to shoot him or whatever. There's no guarantee that he wouldn't have done something else illegal or harmful to somebody else, or maybe even harmed himself because he was drunk. But like, I don't know, man. He has sobered up enough to wrestle away from two cops, and he got shot in the back several times, and he ended up dying. And that's sad. That's tragic, and that's unfortunate. And I hate that happened. Part of me does wish that they would have maybe pursued him and not shot him, so that he would still be alive, because the loss of life hurts. And that's the part of Black Lives Matter I agree with. Like, it matters that he got shot and died to me, even though I think he probably did some ill-advised things. I don't want him to die, right? And I don't even know that the police officers wanted to kill him. They just wanted to stop him. But like, damn, I don't know, man. That's a fucking tough ass situation. Like, what do? You're in pursuit of somebody. He's getting away from you. You don't know why he's running. For all you know, he could be involved in some criminal activity, and he's trying to evade you for that reason, right? But you don't know all of the details. So what do? If Rayshard Brooks would have got away and then committed a murder, then are those cops irresponsible because they could have shot him while he was in the drive-through, but they didn't? Like, what? Like, nobody wants to have these nuanced discussions. Everybody wants to like have these cookie cutter takes of all white cops are bad, because they kill black people sometimes. Like, bro, like I don't know, man. Like, and it's not even clear when police shootings are justified and when they're not, when they're necessary and when they're not. It's not even clear, man. So like, this is all tough, and I'm just trying to get us, if anything else, I'm not really trying to take a position on whether or not the Rayshard Brooks shooting was justified, whether or not George Floyd, Jacob
Jacob
Blake were
Blake.
justified. I'm really just trying to get us to appreciate how controversial and difficult to answer these questions are. These Black Lives Matter types, particularly the real radicals of them, act like this is all simple. Like
Oh no,
obviously
they
the
think
cops
that
were wrong.
restorative justice will solves everything.
Yeah, and I don't think that it will, man. Especially when it comes to violence being perpetrated, I don't know that it will, man. Like it's like there's gonna be situations that defy that
People go through
solution.
certain things in life. There are certain traumas that people go through that there's no amount of talking to or therapy or
Right.
restorative justice that's ever going to help them. I feel like, I mean, I don't think I, went through a lot of trauma, but therapy and stuff like that, I don't really, it doesn't, meditation, all of that, it doesn't do anything for me. So I can understand if that didn't work on other people. And then but I don't understand why they think that that's like a solution. It could be
Mhm.
a solution for certain people, but to make
Well,
that
it might to steelman them a
the
little bit. It might be motivated by a harm reduction principle. So it's not like the solution, meaning we'll never have this again. It's more like we can minimize the likelihood that these kind of outcomes will happen, because the value here is preserving life, particularly Black life, which historically has been treated as if it doesn't matter. That's the best way to steelman the position. And
okay.
so I think that they have a point, because you do want to minimize the likelihood that anybody will get shot, but Black people in particular will get shot and die at the hands of
Uh-huh.
cops when it's avoidable. I think that makes sense. So I'm very sympathetic to situations like what happened with Philando Castile. I think that cop was probably negligent. I'm very sympathetic to what happened with Breonna Taylor. Although that gets complex too and doesn't have easy answers. The no
Mhm.
knock warrant thing was in that particular situation made it so that cops were shooting kind of blindly at people, and there's a lot of risk involved with that in a residential area. Um, and so there's a question about whether or not there was a reason it was reasonable to expect um Breonna Taylor and her boyfriend, who was with her at the time, and he was the one that was shooting at the cops. Uh, where there was a was reasonable to expect them to comply with the police officers when they didn't know who was at the door, according to them, right? And they were protecting themselves against who they thought were just some random motherfucking strangers. Like, who the fuck are y'all? Like,
Yeah.
right? That makes that whole thing controversial as hell, and I don't even know what the answer is. I don't know if just banning no knock warrants is a good idea. Their no knock warrants have their purpose too. So it's
Yeah.
like, I don't know if that's a solution, but I don't want the next Breonna Taylor to get shot either. Like, I care about these things. Anybody who is sensible and compassionate cares about these things. We don't want people to just die willy nilly.
I
But
mean,
like,
but you could say that her boyfriend could have been the cause of her death because
but inadvertently, because he
I
know
mean
that
he
he was
was
shooting
trying
at
to protect
cops?
them.
But
Yes,
yeah,
okay.
but what
But
do you
I mean
expect your man to do in that situation? If somebody is banging on your door like they crazy and you don't know who they are, and you got somebody you care about in there, your
but are you
family, your
gonna just
girlfriend,
start shooting?
if you don't know who it is,
I wouldn't just if they're banging on the door, I'm not gonna just start shooting. I don't know.
no, I don't. So first of all, I don't know that he just started shooting because they were banging. What I'm saying is he came out with the gun because he didn't know what was happening,
Right?
right?
So the
I'm not
police
even sure if he
announced
shot
themselves?
first. I'm not sure if he shot because the door got banged in. So all of a sudden there's a motherfucker there with a gun, and you're like, oh shit, and he shot instinctually.
So
That's more understandable
so
than
when the
he just
police
shoots. Go ahead.
when the police barged in, they didn't announce themselves as
So
police.
according to the police, they did.
Okay.
According to him, they didn't.
Yeah, so why did he shoot? Okay.
So I don't know which is true. So let's do both. Let's say that the police announced themselves. He heard it,
Don't
but
shoot.
he didn't care, then
Don't
he would
shoot.
be at fault, clearly. If the police announced themselves, but he didn't hear them because he was just shocked and
Then
surprised,
shoot.
right?
Then
Then
shoot.
that's
Yeah,
more
I
understandable.
would I
If
would
they
support
didn't
shooting.
announce themselves and then they barged in and he didn't know who the fuck they were, then
Right.
it's the most understandable.
Yeah.
So those are three different
That's really
scenarios, and
understandable.
some of those scenarios, it makes it understandable what he did. One of those scenarios, he's clearly at fault, but I don't know which is true.
Yeah, I don't know which is true either. That's why I don't really I've never really discussed the Breonna Taylor thing. Um
It's sad. I mean, all of
'Cause
these, all of
I
these are
just
tragic, man. These
I
are
just
very
don't
tragic
know.
situations.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they're all tragic. Of course, no one wants people's lives to be lost, but like, I'm, if you contributed to it, I mean,
But
that's
inadvertently
the
though,
thing.
like act like
People don't want to admit the contribution that the person that died made to their own death. That's the thing I have the issue with.
to whatever extent that they're at fault. Yeah, but what I
Yeah.
guess what I'm trying to get you to appreciate, and not that you don't, you probably do, is
Hmm.
that in a lot of these cases, it's actually not clear how at fault they are, even though they causally contributed to it. How reasonable was it to expect them to act different in the moment, given what they know or didn't know? That when you take that into account, then it's like harder to say, oh, well, they're at fault at least partially. You see what I'm saying? If you're caught off guard by something and you're acting in a way just out of pure instinct and you haven't
Jason,
assessed the situation,
was George Floyd caught off guard?
no, I don't think so. I think
Um,
that that's
was
not a good
Jacob
example of
Blake
what I'm
caught
talking
off
about.
guard?
No, I think those are bad examples of what I'm talking about.
Rashard Brooks product caught off guard?
Um, maybe quasi because he was unconscious or inebriated, but that would be his fault. But
The guy, there was
I
another
think a
one, the
better
guy that
example.
shot through the apartment of a mother and her kids.
No, he's just clearly at fault.
I
But based on what I know, but I got to have that caveat because sometimes some more details come out that I don't that I'm not aware of, and I would
mhm,
change my view accordingly. But based on what I knew, um, this person was a mentally disturbed person. He was shooting into someone's house that had kids in there, and they showed the bullets or whatever,
mhm,
and then they had like a standoff, and they were trying to negotiate
yeah,
him for come out, and there was like hours that went by before they ended up shooting him, and I don't know why, but I think he started shooting at cops, but I don't know if that's true. So put a pin in that. I have no, I don't want to speak about issues I don't fully know the details, but the
yeah.
details would matter, and that would color my assessment of whether or not that person was at fault. But insofar as I'm concerned, it doesn't seem like he had a legitimate reason to be shooting indiscriminately into
It
anybody's
doesn't
house.
seem like that either. But then somehow BLM activists still
That's fair, and
decided
I'll
to
criticize them for that.
defend
But
him.
a better example of what I'm talking about is the Breonna Taylor example, which is why I cited it. The
And
other
the
examples
Philando
aren't good examples of
Castile,
what I'm talking
yeah,
about,
yeah.
right? So we got to take these case by case. Like
Murky
that's
Waters.
yeah, we got to take this case by case. Philando Castile, I think that was a better example of what I'm talking
That
about.
was a
Philando
crazy
Castile tried to
situation.
announce that he had a gun because he's
Yeah,
required to by
exactly.
law,
That
and the
was a
motherfucker shot that motherfucker in front
very
of his
unfortunate
child,
situation.
bruh. Like, damn.
Yeah, yeah.
And he seemed scared as shit. The cop was scared as shit. Like, I told him not to go for it. Like, what the fuck, bro? Like, you supposed to be a police officer, bro. Like, why are you so scared, bro?
Yeah.
So, you know,
I think with the police reform, they should do well to vet better vetting.
man, you
Definitely.
about to open up a whole new can of worms. So we got to move off this. I will say this to address what you just said before we move on to the next story. You're right in general, but like with the whole defund the police movement, what that has actually done is it's driven a lot of good cops
Yes,
out of
you're
the profession
absolutely right.
and left a
Yep.
bunch of bad cops who don't
Yep.
give a shit and are trying to collect
Yep.
paychecks. And
Absolutely.
that's actually going to contribute to the opposite of what they want.
Yep. Yep.
And I don't know that any social workers would do better in these situations anyway. Maybe in some of them, maybe in being able to talk down the person who was shooting in that apartment. Maybe a social worker would be better. Maybe a social worker would have been able to talk Rayshard Brooks down and prevent him from doing, reacting the way he did, or maybe talk the cops down and be like, don't, let's
Don't
like
they have
let him off easy or
negotiators
whatever.
for that?
Huh?
You need a social.
Negotiators? Yeah, so there was a negotiator
Most
involved.
social workers.
There was in fact a negotiator involved with that guy that shot in
I
that
don't know how
apartment.
comfortable
But
female
negotiators ain't
social workers.
perfect either, and I don't think that they
No,
count as
I
social workers.
understand that, but like,
Negotiators are usually police officers.
yeah,
They're not social workers.
exactly. And I don't know how comfortable a female, because I feel like most. I mean, I'm assuming here, but
Not all social workers are females.
I know, but I feel like a majority of them are, and I don't know
Yeah.
how comfortable they will feel wanting to be in that kind of situation.
I
I
mean,
know
some
I
females are
wouldn't.
police officers though.
Okay, but a majority are still male.
Okay, probably. Yeah, I think that's true. Actually,
I, I mean, that's a
maybe that's
whole
true.
nother other can where I don't even think females should be in these kind of professions. But anyway,
Mm,